everybody, welcome to the Uber Cordero Show. This is Uber Cordero. This coming episode, we're going to be talking about China. So stay with me. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and follow us. Also like the videos. You can also share them on Facebook so your friends can get the knowledge for free. Since 2000, China has emerged as Africa's trading partner. Trade volumes has increased by 700%. Chinese direct investment to Africa has increased as well. Chinese workers have moved to Africa, and some have even settled there. There are new Sino-cultural centers, entangled diplomatic engagements, and increasing admiration of China by Africans. There is also anti-Chinese sentiments arising from the perception of debt imperialism, which we'll talk about in the subsequent videos. Yet, China's engagement with Africa has led to an average of 7% growth of gross domestic product per annum from 2000 to around 2010. This growth partially led by Chinese appetite for Africa's natural resources like oil, gas, timber, name it, as well as the numerous construction sites owned by Chinese in Africa. In this 3-episode analysis, we trace the Chinese engagement with Africa from the Middle Ages to the modern times. This video focuses on the history of China as well as the modalities of China's engagement with Africa. Thus, we answer 3 major questions. What is the history of China and Africa? What are the modalities of China's engagement with Africa in the post-independence era? And why does this matter? So stay with me so we can proceed on. To trace back Chinese engagement with Africa, we look back at the evidence that traces back to 14th century through the journey of a Moroccan explorer called Ibn Battuta, who traveled to China and praised the Chinese empire for its security and civilization. He said nobody would attempt to rob you, even if you carried goods worth thousands of, values back then. Another is a Somalian explorer who is called Said of Mogadishu, who also met Battuta and shared the same sentiments about China. And the Chinese were subsequently excited about the prospect of coming to Africa, and they did come, meeting the Somalis of the Ajura Empire around 14th century. Now, in 15th century, the Ming dynasty led voyages to East and South Africa, where they were gifted with elephants and exotic animals like giraffes. These were later sent back to Beijing, and the Chinese were so excited about them. Extractions, archaeological extractions have shown Chinese coins of the Song dynasty, and this is much evidenced by the works of Richard Pankhurst, who did a lot of work mining, excavating Chinese peninsula in East Africa. Ming dynasty explained how African and Chinese cultures were entangled, my favorite word of the season. And it shows that there were contacts between these two great civilizations for a long time, especially in East Africa and southern parts of Mozambique. Oral traditions have also confirmed that China and Africa were engaged in trade long before the European came. In fact, there is evidence of a voyage of over 300 fleet of ships, one of them which wrecked right in the island of Pate, next to north part of Mombasa. And this Chinese man settled and married local women that they sired children with. Just to remind you, this will be common in the history of China. They're still doing quite a bit of this in Angola, especially, and the Congo. And the descendants of these Chinese sailors still live in East Africa. And in 2010, Chinese government, People's Republic of China, sent some of these descendants to China to study on free scholarship, which was also a diplomatic gesture to show Africa that they were more tied than they are with the Europeans because of this history. A book written by a South African writer, his name is Daniel Mann, and the book is called Color, Confusion and Concision, History of Chinese in South Africa. Discusses the story of Awatwa people, which directly translates to the forgotten people. These are descendants of Chinese explorers who had come in South Africa in 14th century, and some of them were later brought by British colonialists from Singapore, but because Chinese engaged with African women and it was embarrassing for them to admit this, so they forgot them. So these people basically named themselves out of this shame. They call the Awatwa people of Cape Colony. Interesting history between China and Africa, long before the European colonial period. Now let's go to the post-independence era. Now for this period, I borrow from the work of Deborah Broughtigam in a book called The Dragon's Gift, Real Story of China in Africa. So it traces the Chinese engagement with Africa, which can be divided into two periods. One, 1960 to 1978, and from 1978 to the present time. Now, in 1960s, China was profoundly underdeveloped. In fact, many of African countries had higher GDPs than China. It was committed to Africa because of ideological reasons of anti-imperialism and communism. Remember, China was also a subject to colonialism. It was divided into small city-states by the British and the French, as well as the Portuguese, and Japan basically colonized China. So Chinese people understood what it meant to be colonized. China had been occupied and colonized like Africa, and the first major recipient of Chinese aid was the Republic of Guinea, led by Sékou Touré, which had broken ties with France in 1958 because they rejected joining the French Federation of West Africa. China offered Guinea a no-interest loan of about $25 million. By 1963, there were 3,000 Chinese in Guinea. At this time, Chinese foreign minister, his name is Zhou Enlai, did a diplomatic tour of Africa and made further commitments to other African countries. In the next decade of about 1970 to 1980s, China built a lot of infrastructure in Africa, including stadiums. If you're Kenyan, you know Moi International Stadiums was built by the Chinese during the Moi era. They also built parliaments, hospitals in Africa, and China also entered a war of decolonization in Africa, fighting on the side of MPLA against South African apartheid regime in Angola. So China was big in Africa before the modern period. But China's biggest project in Africa was called the Tazara Railway, which is short for Tanzania-Zambia Railway, which was built in the 70s. It's a 1,200 line connecting Dar es Salaam to Lusaka, and it costed these two countries $500 million with no interest. China gave them this money, no interest. 50,000 Chinese workers were involved in this project, and by 1978, China had given more aid to Africa than the United States, even though it was at the height of the Cold War. So in 1976, Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, is dead, and China starts a process of reform. China had been hibernating from the Western world. Now they're coming out. They want a new model. And the new leader, his name is Deng Xiaoping. Xiaoping focuses on a new engagement with Africa. His prime minister, his name is Zhao Xinyang, outlined 4 principles that guides Chinese foreign policy in Africa. One of them was on equality and mutual benefit, and stress on practical result, diversity in form, and common progress. Chinese wanted a different approach to aid and to engagement with Africa. And one of the ways that they do this is through China consolidates existing relationship with already existing African countries that had recognized them in the UN vote of 1971. Remember, before that, the UN only recognized Taiwan. And later on in 1971, with the help of African independent countries, they vote for the UN Security Council to recognize People's Republic of China. China also focused on not launching new projects. They wanted to build up on what they had done in the last 3 decades. And they committed to not intervene in internal politics of African states. Key point, commitment not to intervene in internal politics of African states. Very different from European engagement with Africa as well as the American. This is a broad area, so I focus on the practical era, what we call the practical era, the post-1978. And China's economic reforms is creating wealth. And one of the ways that China creates this wealth is through economic ties with its previous colonizer, Japan, that becomes a model for how it engages Africa. So from 1973, Japan invested in Chinese oil refineries and oil infrastructure through low-interest loans. China paid these loans through transfer of oil to Tokyo instead of foreign exchange in forms of dollars. Japan later transferred low technology capital goods to China and was paid by final products or mixed assemblage. So China was benefiting planning technology transfer from Japan and stuff. This was called the Flying G's model. And a lot of other Asian countries later on adopted it, including South Korea, Japan, a little bit of Indonesia, da-da-da-da. China applied this model of development to Africa starting from the 1980s. So in terms of aid, China ranks low compared to the West, how much it gives to Africa. But in terms of other things, China is increasing immensely in Africa. So by 2015, China had made a pledge to donate $60 billion in loan and aid to Africa. But most of this was in the form of trade. China does what we call labor transfers. A lot of Chinese young men coming into Africa to work on projects that the Chinese are doing. And many of these young men are unable to marry because there is a deficit of young women. So they end up engaging with young women in Africa and give birth to babies that some of them claim, some of them don't claim. So this is really a consequence of this labor transfer of Chinese. But what China does for Africa is called the technology transfer, which Westerners hadn't done in Africa since the end of the colonial period. So China comes in and offers new technology, new innovation at a cheaper price than the Westerners were willing to do. Now today, China has signed concessions with African countries. These concessions, defined as investment, included by 2013, Angola at $12 billion, Sudan, $10 billion, Ghana, $10 billion, Ethiopia, $10 billion, Sudan, DRC, $9 billion, and Kenya, $7 billion. A big chunk of this money includes loans that these states have to pay back and are loaned by the Chinese banks, or often controlled by the state. China has also invested a great deal on hydropower stations, especially in Ethiopia, in the Congo, and many other places. They have also built quite a number of roads, like highways are sprouting in Africa, interstate systems financed by Chinese money. In oil, China has been engaged a lot in oil mining, especially in the oil-rich countries of Nigeria, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, name them. And many, many high-rise buildings propping up in African cities financed by Chinese money. So what do Africans do? Africans import finished manufactured goods from China and bring it, giving Africans access to basic things like computers, cell phones, and many other things that will be very expensive for them. So in short, Chinese engagement with Africa is a combination of trade, aid, and investment, and it is linked with the history of China and Africa from the colonial era into the post-colonial period. It is also defined by the fact that for the longest part of Africa's post-colonial period, Western nations have looked on the other side. They had not engaged Africa fully, and China saw this as an opportunity. Now, if you like this video and you will continue to follow me, be sure to watch part 2 of this session where I discuss China and how this engagement have been carried out in Africa. Thank you for watching. Feel free to subscribe.